Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. Sorry, I know it's less than ideal that you can't see me at this point in time, but I may pop up and we just all love the technical challenge at the most crucial times. But I'd like to thank you for your patience and also thank you for taking the time to join us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are joining today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. My name is Annie Peters and I'm the Gifts and Wills Specialist at Habitat for Humanity Australia. I wish you could see me because I do have a smile on my face. I love my job and I get to speak to so many of our wonderful supporters, just like you, who share many and varied reasons why they choose to support us, and many times not only us. And I'm humbled and grateful for their compassion, foresight, ongoing commitment and support. Today we will be exploring the topic of online wills and how you can effectively secure your legacy to protect the people and causes that are close to your heart. We are fortunate to have Isabel Makarian, Principal Solicitor at Safewill Legal, joining us today. Isabel will share valuable information and insights about the online will writing process, the importance of having a will, and why it is important to have legal oversight when it comes to your legacy. But before we get underway, just some quick housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded, so if you happen to miss anything, don't worry. You'll have the chance to go back and re-watch it later on. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat via the Q&A function at the top of your screen, and we'll come back to those towards the end. Be sure to stick around to the end though, and you'll be able to access a special offer as part of Habitat's special partnership with Safewill. At Habitat for Humanity, we believe that everyone has the right to a safe and decent place to live. Using shelter as a platform for resilience, we work together with the world's most vulnerable families, access safe shelter, water, sanitation and hygiene, and livelihood training. We believe a stable, secure home creates the foundation for change. In saying that, we believe that home is much more about bricks and mortar. A home gives people the opportunity to be healthier, happier and more secure. It allows children to be better nourished and better educated and leads to stronger communities that can go on and grow and sustain themselves. With the support from Gifts and Wills and in together with our vital and valued community, we've been able to help over 39 million people achieve new or improved shelter. And it's thanks to people like you. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Isabel. Isabel, thank you so much for joining us. We are delighted to have you with us.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. I'll just give everyone a brief background on you and your experience. Prior to establishing Safewill Legal, Isabel was a lawyer at one of Sydney's most specialised tax and estate planning practices. After dealing extensively with complex estates and high net worth clients, Isabel was inspired to create a law firm that used technology to simplify the estate planning process and allow a greater level of accessibility for all Australians. Isabel holds a Bachelor of Laws and Finance with first-class honours from Macquarie University, and she is currently completing her Master of Laws, specialising in wills and estates at the College of Law. And one final thing just before I hand over to you, Isabel, just some background on our partner Safewill. Safewill is an online will writing platform which was founded in 2018 by two former lawyers after a mutual friend of theirs passed away unexpectedly without a will. Traditionally, will writing has been one of those things seen as often too expensive and time-consuming, and a process that not many people necessarily have the capacity to undertake. Therefore, Safewill was started to ensure that something as important as one's estate was considered and taken care of in an easy and affordable way. Safewill is supported by Safewill Legal, an award-winning and dedicated estate law service who review each written will through the Safewill platform. Now, finally, it gives me great pleasure to pass over to Isabel, who we're all eager to hear from. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to be here speaking with you all. I think we've got a lot to cover today. I want to talk to you about, will writing, why it's important, what happens when we don't look at our estate planning, and then go into how the Safewill platform works and try and give you some visuals on what this process would involve, how simple it can be, but also how important it is to understand the document you're creating and to have some legal oversight over that document. I think we're going to leave some time for questions at the end. So, as you go, if you, think of anything or have any questions as I'm talking, please note it down. We're quite an intimate group, so if there's something really difficult that I'm talking through or you can't hear something, just pop off mute and let me know. But otherwise, we'll get started. So, as Annie mentioned, I'll just get you to go to the next slide, Annie. But as Annie mentioned, sorry, back one. Safewill is a holistic online estate planning platform. It was originally started as an online will platform, and that was after a close friend of one of our founders passed away, and they saw how difficult it was to actually deal with an estate without the will in place, and how a will completely simplifies what is a really difficult time. So from the will writing platform, it's grown into providing a more holistic service. So it allows people to create powers of attorney. It allows people to store information about their estate and their affairs, and it also allows people to access affordable legal advice if they'd like. So Safewill is supported by Safewill Legal, which is the law firm that I run. And what we do is we review every single will that's written by, customers on that platform to make sure that people are using the platform correctly. And within that group, we've also got a really amazing funeral team that help people plan for end of life and deal with end of life. So it is really quite a specialized area, but Safewill's trying to cover it all, and it's trying to do that using technology to make things as straightforward and as accessible as possible, because in this area, I think access has been a really big issue, and affordability has, of course, been quite a big issue. So, that's what the company is trying to do. The starting point when we look at, estate planning as a concept, estate planning is about planning for what's going to happen with your assets and your affairs after you pass, and it also covers that time where if something happens and you lose capacity but you're still alive. So it's not a fun area by any means to talk about, but unfortunately, because of the fact it's not fun, and it's not what we want to be thinking about, it also means it's even more important to just address, get it off the bucket list and keep moving, because if something happens and you need these documents, everyone is already, they're feeling a lot of different things. They're really upset. It's already very stressful. And having this stuff done makes it a lot easier. So Annie, I'll just get you to go to the next slide. And where we'll start with is, why do we even have a will? So it sets the context. Around half of Australian adults don't have a will. It's quite a high statistic. And as I've touched on, a lot of the feedback comes from access, from the fact that they don't have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to spend on this area. They don't have the time to go and visit a solicitor's office and go back and forth twice. And it's also just difficult because they think they need to list everything they own and go through this involved process to make the document. What happens when we have a statistic like that? It creates this circumstance where, for all those people that don't have a will, the law is actually going to decide how your estate should be distributed. So there is a set formula in each act, in each state. Their legislation sets out the order of inheritance, and sometimes it can be what you want it to be. It benefits nuclear families a little bit more, I will say. And so it also makes it more complicated if you've got a blended family or a situation where perhaps, you know, you don't want estranged family members to benefit. So essentially, because the law determines who gets what, it can create these scenarios where persons that you might not otherwise have given to will come to benefit. Sorry, I think it just stalled there. Can you all still hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Dan. So I'll just continue on from that example. So the sister was on the phone to us, and her brother had passed away, and they owned their family home together, half-half. Now, they had a really close relationship. The understanding always was when that brother passed away that his half of the house would go to his sister because they all lived there as a family. Unfortunately, what happened when the sister called, I started taking her through the family tree, and this brother actually they both had half siblings in the UK, but they're blood siblings, and so under the law they're treated equally to the sister. And what ended up happening is this piece of real estate, which is worth, you know, $1 million. It's a family home in Sydney. It was around that much. All of those siblings were entitled to it equally, and so in order to keep her family home, the sister had to figure out a way to basically pass over that value to these siblings that they hadn't talked to in 20 years that were living in another country. And it was a really, you know, unfortunate situation because there was nothing that could be done because the law prescribed it was mandatory for all three siblings to inherit equally. And so it's just one example of how a really simple, straightforward will that said, you know, my sister's my executor, my sister gets my estate, would have avoided nothing short of a catastrophe for that family, because that's their family home and they don't have liquid cash to deal with the problem. And, you know, that's an example of what a will is trying to solve. And look, I can appreciate that for some that would be a worst case example, but there are other practical examples, even for relatively straightforward circumstances, that, you know, a will solves the problem of. And that includes, I've made a note there, it's really common for de facto partners to experience more difficulty in administering the estate under intestacy law because the evidence thresholds are higher. It's this concept of having to prove who you are. Because there's no will, you have to prove your relationship. And that extends to all aspects. You know, there's no will, a bank will say, okay, go and get either letters of administration or prove your relationship. And then you have to go through the whole family tree. You have to dig up birth certificates, you have to dig up death certificates. And so what's happening is, because the default under the law is a certain way, without the document, there's just a lot more personal admin involved, even if you do have a relatively simple family structure. So that's just a little bit of background about why the document is important. And, you know, as I mentioned, people traditionally haven't had time for this estate planning for various reasons. And I think what Safewill's trying to achieve is to make it as easy as possible to make the document, because what needs to be done is, you know, you need to appoint someone to manage your affairs and you need to appoint a beneficiary of an estate. And what the online will technology is allowing you to do is it's allowing you to put your instructions for what you want to occur, and it's digitally generating your will using specialized technology. And so when we're talking about online wills, we're talking about a will that automates the manual process of drafting. and you're basically replacing the time it would take a lawyer to type in your own name, your own family members. You're taking that time on board, and you're making that whole process more affordable for yourself. And just a final point, in terms of the, reason why the wills work online versus in paper, all the requirements for validity are the same. After you create your will online, you're still printing it in paper, you're still signing it in the same way. So I guess that's why this technology works and why it's rather straightforward. So just moving on to the next slide. I wanted to go a little bit more in detail to the will writing process, because I think a lot of people think, okay, I have to write my will, I have to write down every single thing I own, I have to put someone's name next to it, this is going to take me a really long time. And as I mentioned, that's why people don't get around to doing this. And I've touched on the fact that you need to appoint an executor and you need to put beneficiaries forward, but what does that actually mean? So extending on from this concept of online will writing, how Safewill works is it's creating this step-by-step process where you're going to spend about 20 minutes answering some really straightforward questions across modules. So what you do is you create an account. That account is in your name and it's linked to you. So that's, the most important step. And we use two-factor authentication to make sure to the best extent possible that the person creating the account is the will writer. You're then going to just pop your details in, and there'll be some photos as we move through of what the platform looks like, but you'll put, your name, your partner's name, if you have one, your kids' names, if you have them, friends, family, and you'll answer questions throughout the module, and there'll be guidance notes along the way. So it will say, who do you want your executor to be? And there'll be a tip. An executor is someone that carries out the instructions in your will. So their job is to read your will, to look at what it says, and then, after passing, they will be the ones that are locating the assets, paying the liabilities, collecting everything up, and distributing everything in accordance with, your estate. Some people, they keep it straightforward. Everything's going to their spouse is their executor. That's that. Some people might think, you know what, this is a bit of a technical role. I know my spouse doesn't really like paperwork, or my child doesn't really like this. My brother's really strong. He's an accountant. He's good at financial things. I'll appoint him. And I'm giving you a lot more detail now because we've got the time for me to explain it in person, but there will be tips and tricks like this along the way to just explain the context of what you're filling out and to help you as best as possible. And with that, you start to see the difference between, some people choose to use static documents like will kits historically to create their wills. What this is doing is creating a digital process where you're guided, and it helps you a lot more to get the right information in the right place and to avoid problems in will writing and the document generation. So once you've filled everything out, the will is submitted and it goes through a review process, and then it can be printed and signed. Now, what I'll go through on the slides now is just some visuals so you can see what I've been talking about in a bit more of a practical way. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is what the homepage of your account will look like. This is when your will is in progress. You can see there's an about yourself module, a family module, an executor module, an estate module. It keeps going. There's an assets module, a gifts module, an assets module, and a funerals module. In the about yourself, that's when you go in, you just say, my name's Isabel Makarian. Actually, my middle name is Annie. And I'll put it all in there. I'll put in my partner's name, and then I'll put in my, best contact number and certain details just to link the will to me. It's important to be accurate because, this is your document. And then you'll go into the family module. That's where you can pop in your kids, any pets, and again, you put in their names and address to identify them. And so what you're doing is you're entering the data, you know your own, family, so it's relatively straightforward, and you just click next. Then you get to the executors module. As I mentioned, the executor is the person that's carrying out the instructions in the will. And here you're going to have an option to appoint, one or two primary executors. And then if something happens and those primary executors can't act, you're going to have the option to appoint backup executors as well. So that will be your third module. You'll get to the estate module as well. And in that module, that's where you really think, okay, who do I want to get most of my things? And you have the option to leave, a gift to family, to friends, to charity. As Annie mentioned, charities rely really heavily on bequest fundraising to do amazing work, and we see a lot of really generous gifts to charity, whether it's in the estate module or the gifts module. So you have the opportunity to think about that there. Now, I'll get Annie to move over to the next slide, because you'll see a little bit about how the questions work and the tips work, and the data gets entered. So for example, this question's asking you if you have kids. You can click yes, you can click no, you can move on. You can update the document as well at any time, might I add. So while you're going, sometimes you're not sure of all the information, or maybe you don't have a kid yet, but you might want to have them in the future. The great thing about Safewill is that your document comes with unlimited updates for the first year, and thereafter with the subscription, you can update this document continuously for forever. And what that means is that as circumstances change, you can always come back into your account. You can change things around. You can resubmit the will, and if you had already signed one, you have to re-sign it to ensure that it's valid and that your changes are carried across. But the actual functionality is allowing for constant amendment. So that's really great. So this is like the question interface, and that's what you'll see across a lot of the modules. And I'll just get Annie to move along, and you'll see on the sidebar, this is how you enter the details. So you just write their full name, you give one identifier, and there's an option to give an email if you'd like, and then you can save them, and then you can move on. So the same interface, the same visuals are used throughout the modules, so it looks quite consistent, but the questions will just be different. I'll just get you to move to the next slide, and you'll see, I think, the gifts section. So after you've done your executorship, your estate, there's an option to leave specific gifts. So I'll talk about this a little bit, because I think one of the big misconceptions is when you do a will, you have to write down everything you own. In actuality, when you're doing a will, you're thinking about things in two buckets. One is, this is all my stuff, and generally where do I want it to go? And the estate module lets you say, I generally want it all to go to my children, say 50% each, or I generally want it to go to my mum, or I generally want it to go to my friend as to 10%, and then I want my kids to get 90%. And that's more of a percentage and a proportion-based question. If everything's in one bucket, how do you want to split it up? And you're also allowed to, select backups. So you might say, I generally want everything to go to my spouse in the first instance. So that'll be your 100% primary beneficiary. And then the backups I want to share across both my children. So they'll be your secondary beneficiaries. And that's in the estate module. And you haven't had to mention anything about what you own, because what you own changes over time. And so it's really challenging if you had to update your will every single time you bought or sold something. The principle of will writing is more, assume you buy and sell over time. Generally speaking, what's the percentage split? So that's the estate module. But when you get to the gifts module, what it's saying is, what do you want to carve out? So maybe you generally want everything to go to your partner, but there's this, bracelet that's really special to you that you want your sister to get. That's when you'd carve that out in the gifts module. Or, there's this photo album that's, a memory you'd want your mum to get it. She made it for you. You're happy to give it back a parent or, a best friend, that's what you'd put in the gift module. So with the gifts, you can see you can add a possession or you can add some funds. If you're doing money, you can write it in as a dollar amount. If you're doing a possession, you can, describe it quite specifically, and then you can add a person. And again, there's an opportunity to either leave a gift to a person or a charity. You might want to leave a specific dollar gift to a charity. Some people choose to leave percentages. So what you choose to do depends on what's most suitable for you, but the functionality is there. You can do whatever you like and you can customize it in whatever way you like. So that's just a little bit about the visuals, how it works, what it looks like, and what you might put in each section. So after you kind of finish each of the modules, you'll get to, there's an assets module as well and a funerals module. I don't think I've popped photos of those in there, but what you can do is basically, as at the time of writing the will, you might want to make a listed lease just for your purposes of what you own, and what's in your mind when you're doing this document, just so there's a record somewhere, because I think there's that information gap sometimes where your executor might not necessarily know everything that you own. And then the last module is the funeral module, which is just, sharing your wishes about things that are important to you. Maybe there's a family burial plot that it's important that you are laid there, or you have funeral wishes or music wishes or anything. We get some really funny notes in there and really sweet notes in there as well. So once you've done all of that, you've completed, all the modules in the will, and you can see that you're done because there's a little tick. So for example, you can see the funeral one in this example has a little tick in it. The other thing I wanted to show you is just down the left hand side, you can see there's dashboard, your will, power of attorney, end of life planning, and gifts. I'm just very briefly going to touch on these things because they're what make up the complete estate plan. The power of attorney is a module that allows you to create 2 documents. And in some states they're combined, so it might just be 1 document. But basically, a power of attorney lets you appoint a trusted person or people to manage your financial affairs or your medical affairs in the event that you're living but you're not able to make those decisions. So this is where you've lost capacity. And in the same way you can fill in information and go from section to section with the will, you can do the same thing with the power of attorney, and the platform will generate the correct power of attorney documents for your state. And these are, again, really simple documents that if you do them, they save a lot of trouble later, because at a point in time, maybe if you've lost capacity and you've got assets in your name, you're not legally allowed to deal with those assets. A family can be quite difficult for them to get access to pay for things, to either for your medical care or for their own personal care, and having a power of attorney in place will avoid them having to make a more complicated application to the state tribunal for that authority. So that's what that power of attorney tab will be dealing with. And there's a broader end of life planning tab as well. And I'll touch on it a little because it's an extension almost of the assets section in the will flow. Generally, we've come to understand that there is a really significant information gap sometimes between the person that's writing their will and the person that's actually dealing with the estate. So I write my will, I know everything about myself, I know what I own, I know what subscriptions I have and what payments I have, and if I'm with Energy Australia, and who my accountant is, I know all of that. My partner might not even know all of that because I have my own files, he might have his own files, or my kids might not know all of that. And so what the end of life planning section will open up to is this concept of the vault. And the Safewill Vault is recently launched, but it's designed to really act as a living information vault of your assets, your liabilities, key information, that if you keep it up to date over time, it not only helps you understand what you have and where everything is, but if something happens and your executor needs to step in and administer your estate after passing, they can access that information and it will make the whole process much more straightforward for them. It will make it much easier for them to, you know, either instruct lawyers or apply for probate or do any of those things. And I just wanted to explain sort of where it's at and what that left-hand side looked like for you if you go in there. So the good thing, just lastly, about that vault is because it's not part of the will, every time an asset changes, you're not re-signing anything. So you can keep a record there, but it's not impacting this legal document that's been signed. You've taken the trouble to have it witnessed and you're storing it in a safe place. It's a constant digital record that can be changed without much difficulty. So moving on from the visuals, you've now submitted your will, and I've talked a little bit about there's a review and it, you know, you can then print it and sign it. I wanted to talk more about the legal oversight and the review concept. So we've talked a lot about what a will is and why it's important. A little bit more context here. There are traditionally, you know, 3 ways that people have created wills. They have written them themselves. So they've bought a DIY post office will kit, written a will. They have instructed a lawyer to write their will, or in more modern times, they've used an online platform. With DIY wills, there's no oversight in what's being written in the document. Similarly, with many online will platforms, they're simply digital versions of a post office will kit. So they're giving you the same fields that a will has, you know, executor, beneficiary, gifts, etc., but there's no review happening of the document. So they're relying entirely on you to fill it out correctly and use the technology correctly. How Safewill differs is that we just believe it's really important that the documents that you're creating are getting checked. So every single will that gets created, what my team does is that we have a look at what's been filled in, and we just make sure that the platform's being used correctly and that there aren't instructions that are getting written in or descriptions that are getting written in that are going to cause problems down the track or cause any invalidity down the track. So this could be something like the way you're describing a gift, or not providing full details for beneficiaries, which will make it harder to record them down the track, or trying to provide instructions that are more complicated than what the platform allows for. Because if you can appreciate, there's obviously a set flow, and there's certain clauses that exist inside the will that's generated, and there's certain clauses that don't. Now, the platform's suitable for the majority of Australians, but sometimes people have more complicated affairs, or they need more support, or they want to draft something that's a little bit different. And what we're looking out for is just making sure that that's not happening inside the simple will document. And what the last drop point is touching on is if that applies and you're someone that needs more support, or there's some complexity in your situation, or, you know, you need some tailored clauses in the will, we are also the only platform that allows for the optionality of legal advice. So if the online will is suitable for you and the regular review is enough, that is great. But if you did want something more and you wanted to speak to a lawyer on the phone, we also offer the ability to book in a legal advice call for a really low fixed fee to make sure that you're getting the document that's correct for your personal circumstances. And I think that's just something to look out for, understanding that it is a legal document. Estate planning isn't, you know, just like online shopping in its sense that it's a meaningless product. It's a very meaningful product, even though I do like online shopping as well. It is something that is going to create a lasting impact. It is something that you want to be done, you want done properly, and just understanding that there is this process of oversight and understanding, you know, when it might be suitable to get further advice is also really important. Now, there's a little bit more I can go into on the legal oversight and the legal review, or complexities, the submission process, and things like that. I am able to do that, but I'm just conscious that there might be specific questions which I'd prefer to leave some some time for. Otherwise, I can do a little bit more detail here, but it might be a good time to stop on that slide and perhaps pass back to you, Annie, if you wanted to, you know, go through any questions. I'm not sure if anything's come through.
Thank you, Isabel. That was really, firstly, can you hear me? Probably
Yes.
still can't see me. Wonderful.
Yes,
At least we've got one. Great. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. And I think Safewill will really provide a much easier way for Australians to be able to complete such an important document, and also not just the document, but what it actually means for them and their estate and the legacy that they'll leave behind. There was a couple of questions that came through, if you don't mind me starting off with those.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the questions was, how long does the review process take for just a simple will?
Yeah, so we aim for all of the reviews to be done within 1 to 2 business days. So that's a general average, and we are, you know, if it's really important and urgent and someone wants their will reviewed quickly, we also are open to that as well. Our customer care team's really good at communicating with us.
Great, thank you. And I think you did touch on this one, but this was around updating. So once the will has been approved, can it be changed and updated? So you might just want to reiterate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll explain that process a little better. So you have your account, and that's got, you know, those modules sitting there. The first time you go through, you submit, you print and sign. If you want to come back and change anything, all you would do is log back in. There is an update will button, and it opens everything up to editing again. You would just go in, edit whatever you like to edit, and then you can submit the will again. If that happens within the first year of your subscription, that's completely free. So if you even want to just submit your will, you have a look at it, you think about it a bit more over the next few weeks, or there's something you want to change within that year, that can happen at no charge. And then otherwise, in perpetuity, if you have a Safewill subscription, you can always update the will. And that's only $15 a year to keep your subscription active forever. And that gives you access to the will, to the power of attorney, to the document storage, the vault. So that's the general process with updating your document.
Okay, thank you. This question's about executors in 2 parts. How many executors can be appointed, and can executors also be a beneficiary?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think people think it's odd for executors to be beneficiaries for some reason. So I'll start with 2. Executors can definitely be beneficiaries. It's really normal, because if someone's a really major beneficiary of your will, it therefore makes sense that they're the person, you know, pushing things along administratively. And many wills, you'll just see child is executor or beneficiary, or same executor, same beneficiary. The number of executors you can appoint on the platform is 2 primary executors. So they would act either 1 or 2. They'd act together if there was 2. And then you can also appoint up to 2 backup executors.
Great. And this was about secondary beneficiaries as well. Can secondary beneficiaries be named?
Yes, absolutely. So when we're saying secondary, we're talking about that second layer. When you are naming a beneficiary, you've got your primary beneficiaries, so they would be the first to inherit. If they can't inherit because they've already passed away, then you've got your backup beneficiaries or your secondaries. And the platform lets you put as many secondary beneficiaries as you want. So you can definitely do both those layers.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, with the concerns these days about online security, this question is preparing your will online safe to do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It definitely is. Security, look, I'm not a tech expert, but working here has just shown me a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes to keep the data secure. There are words I won't be able to explain properly on the call, but basically it is safe to write your will online. Everyone that makes their account, as I mentioned, goes through two-factor authentication to be able to access the document. And I think it's more safe, and it's a little bit of a long answer, but I'll explain why. When we're looking at will writing and safety and who's writing the will and did they know about the will, when you've got a static document, sometimes when you're doing a DIY will, for example, or even a solicitor drafted will where they just send it to you and they don't manage the signing process, there's a lot less data available as to, you know, what was recorded, was someone's mind changed, did instructions change, who was accessing that document, what email address did they use. And so what I find interesting is the online will writing process actually allows you to be protected by data, because, you know, there's a clear record of what decisions you've made and when you've been online, and, you know, God forbid if anything untoward, you know, is happening in the will writing process, there's a lot more data points to have a look at than if there were, you know, there was no data record at all and it was all happening on paper. So from that perspective, from an estate planning lawyer's perspective, I find that really interesting. And then just generally, obviously, data and security, Safewill takes that very, very seriously. They take access to data seriously, and also the data, once it's stored in the system, is stored in a way that is, you know, secure against people being able to, you know, come in and view that data because of the types of service it's stored on and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely as safe as possible, and the company takes it really seriously.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that in a bit more detail. And what is usually the cost of preparing your will online with Safewill?
So normally it is $160 to prepare a single will online with Safewill.
That's a lot cheaper than a lot of other ways you can do it.
Yeah, I think at my previous firm we would charge $660 for a simple will, and many of the types of wills that I was able to generate in that way, I could do the exact same will using the technology. And, you know, even when you look at the most affordable government authorities, I think I was looking online the other day, or a client called me and they said, you know, New South Wales Trustee and Guardian charges $440 for a will. And so really, if you wanted a lawyer drafted will, and, you know, even if for some reason you're like, I just want a little bit more than an online will, adding $160 to the legal advice fee, which is only $199, still gets you a cheaper will than pretty much any other lawyer overseen or drafted will in the country. So the pricing is, you know, the accessibility and the pricing is really a priority for the team, and we want to keep it as affordable as possible while, you know, still making sure it's safe.
Great, thank you. There's a question, who can be a witness for the in-person signing? So when you have to have it witnessed in front of someone.
Yeah, absolutely. So any adult that isn't named in the will. So you really want an independent person, but they don't have to be a lawyer, they don't have to be a JP, they don't have to be a doctor. Any independent adult witness can witness your will, and two people, as you mentioned.
And I think this might be the last question. Do you do couple wills for couples, or are they just purely independent?
Yeah, so we definitely help couples do their wills. I guess the point is a couple should never have the same will. So each person has to have their own will document with their own name at the top, but we definitely facilitate couple wills. So we will allow, you know, one person to do their will, and if their partner also wants a will, then we can help with basically creating the account for the partner. The partner gets a discount of half price to create their will, and the team can actually mirror the terms if the partner gives us instructions and information, just to make it a lot more straightforward, because a lot of people, they want to do the exact same thing in their will document, but they just each are their own person. And so we try and make that process more straightforward by allowing the partner will to be created on the same terms.
Great, thank you for that.
It's all right.
That was the last question. Thank you everyone for participating. They were really good questions. Isabel, I'd like to thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us today, and we're really grateful for all of the information and insights that you've shared with us, and you've given us much to consider and think about. So thank you once again.
That's all right. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope it was helpful for everyone, and I'm also happy to, answer any questions that pop up to you. If they do later, Annie, just let me know.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, everyone, I'll just wrap up. As I mentioned at the start, we recorded the session minus my face, which is absolutely fine. But we will make it available, the recording available. And if you did want to share it with any family or friends, if you feel that it might be beneficial, please feel free to do so. You may notice the big QR code that is on the screen at the moment. Up until the 9th of April, so only 5 more days, you can access a special offer, and in partnership with Safewill, you will be able to have your will written online for free. So you can simply scan that QR code or go to safewill.com/habitat to access that offer. And I'd like to thank our partner Safewill very much for helping us offer our wonderful community of supporters this offer. So thank you all once again for joining us. I hope you did find the session useful today. And before you go, on behalf of the entire Habitat team, thank you for your support. We couldn't do what we do without our wonderful community of supporters like you. So thank you very much and take care.